Hi everyone, I'm Josh. Welcome back to my channel yet again. This time it's for a pretty jam-packed video. I have my second and third quarter wrap up, which was supposed to come at the end of the second and third quarter. The third quarter is not that bad off. The second one never really happened because I had so much going on this year. I was way behind. And stats take a lot of work. But I'm here now and I have my stats and I want to share them with you because it's nice to reflect, but also I have the graphs and I like talking about graphs. But if that's not enough for you, I'm also going to do the end of the year book tag at the end of this video. I may or may not put a timestamp in. I don't know. Hopefully it's not too much content in one. I'm just not putting enough effort into producing enough videos to make these more than one. So I decided to just put it all together. It all seems to fit well. Let's go ahead and get started with the stats video. What I'm going to do is I'm going to walk through all of our stats and I'm going to basically just go ahead and compare the second and third quarter together as I go through each one. So let's start with, how many books did I read in the second and third quarter? That's the first big question that I really should be asking. Okay, so the number of books that I read in both quarters was 18 and 22 respectively. Now, this might tell you that I have not read a lot. Like last year, I think there was one quarter where I read 60 books, like at least 60 books. It's like I've severely cut my reading down, and there are explanations for that. Like, I'm watching more TV, but I'm also listening to more podcasts. Like, I looked at my podcasting listening stats last year, compare like 2020 versus 2019, and it was literally less than half. And we're talking like 19 days versus 38 days of podcasting. So that gives you an idea of how much time I could be listening to audiobooks that I've decided not to. And part of it's just that I was going to burn myself out, and I always get really attached to something when I'm really excited and it's really new. It's good and important to me that I find a manageable long-term pace, something that I can enjoy this passion and still enjoy my other passions, which are inevitably going to get some of my attention. So I have to make it work. And that's what this year's would have been the biggest struggle, to be honest. It's been trying to allow myself not to get burnt out on reading and produce the content I do enjoy doing. It's just a matter of making it fit into my normal schedule now that things are getting back to normal, and both pandemic wise and also personal wise, like for my feelings are growing and what I like to do. So anyways, so 18, 22 books. As far as the months that I read, actually I won't do a monthly breakdown. That's something you can look at the last end of the year. I'll just say that May and June, very bad months. May in particular was really like one book is all I read, and part of that was because I was in the middle of a huge chunker, which was the Tale of Genji. We're talking like 72 hours of audio. That shit was so long, and it's things like that get me sort of burnt out. But at the same time, I don't like DNFing it, even though it's not like the most enjoyable read, because there's some books like that book that have some inherent value outside of raw enjoyment, and it's because I mix into my TBR a mix of books that are for raw enjoyment to some level of, I think, education to some extent, that I think I get burnout, that I get sort of in these slogs, is because I'm making a point to do that, and I have to recognize that these take a little bit of extra effort, which also means I'm just more inclined not to read as much. And while I do want to read more in my life, I always think about this quote from Carl Sagan about how you could read a book a week for the rest of your life, and you'd only read like a small fraction of what's in the world's largest libraries. And the point is the idea is rather that you have to know which ones to read. And while I could read thousands of books in my lifetime, if I don't pick the right ones, it sort of defeats the purpose. Which I know I'm kind of overinflating. There are plenty of books that I read just for fun, so I don't mean to suggest that that's not a part of it too. It's just, I can't help but think of my reading stats as sort of like a lifeline, like a lifetime line of where I'm at in my life, how many books I can read before I die, because life's short. And the number of books are infinite. That's a lot of talking. We're not even that deep into stats. All I did was give you the number of books that I've read. Let's get into the genres. That's where things get really fun. The second quarter, things aren't that different genre-wise. They always seem to be pretty consistent. Nearly a quarter is my sort of green section, which I all clump into literary fiction, historical fiction, and classical. And I didn't read a lot of literary fiction. And part of that, I think, is because I've come to realize literary fiction is hard. So I'm sort of turned off of it sometimes. It takes, as much as I want to diversify my reading, there's some that I feel like have minimal return or with a high risk being, risk of me losing interest. So I've been going to classics, which there's such a large variety of classics that it's easy to enjoy classics that I know I'm going to like. And several of my favorites of these two quarters are going to be classics, because the classics for a reason, but the classics within a genre that I like, and those would probably be horror, fantasy, and sci-fi. This horror fraction is a lot bigger than it has been this last few quarters and last year even, which I like. I'm clearly reading more. At the same time, keep in mind that I read so few books, so it's easy for that to happen. What was this? 2/3 of what I read were my favorites: horror, fantasy, and sci-fi, leaving a little bit of room for nonfiction, which is into being memoirs and science. But usually there's like a quarter to a third. Okay, now comparing that to the third quarter, where I read a few more books, you can see I think things are getting slightly more diversified. Rather, my fantasy is low. My classics are kind of cheating because its classics are always a mix of either horror, fantasy, or sci-fi. But I don't actually think that there are a lot of fantasy classic that I've read, so I don't really know why I didn't read as many there. And then a mix of horror and mystery thriller. That's because I'm realizing I need to get my mystery thrillers read. Not the most exciting to me, but they're a type of book that I still want to get exposed to, and I'm not prepared to unhaul everything just yet, especially since there are the occasional thriller that I really get invested into. My problem is that there's a lot of thrillers that they don't really hit my taste. So not extreme enough to be horror. They are entertaining though, and there is though the occasional book that or is a thriller that really hits really hard the way I want it to. Like Girls Burn Brighter is one, but also the one is the one with the academia and the school and the murder and Shakespeare. If you've read it, you might know what I'm talking about. And I also diversified my nonfiction a bit more. I fed in some history and nonfiction and a bit more memoirs, which was nice. What comes next? What comes next? Triggered myself there. So now let's talk about the years and the dates that were published. So for years, my second quarter was actually pretty good. I mean, a few of them were in the 2016 and 2021. Oh shit, this table's not working right. Fuck, damn it. You know what? Here are the dates of the second, and the third quarter, and make of that if you will. I'm gonna have to edit those afterwards because it's not working correctly, because boo hoo. The lengths are pretty consistent. The most are between 200 and 300, with a few longer books, particularly like one 700 plus page book, which I guess is good. Third quarter is about the same, maybe a couple more longer books. Oh wait, what was that? Wow, my third quarter seems to have been slightly higher in the 300 to 400 range, which I don't know, I'm always proud of myself that I managed to get a bit longer book. And I read a few more, so that means I read more than I thought I did in the third quarter compared to the second quarter, which is good. Things are picking back up. Now, as far as stars go, I have a new graph, no longer a bar graph for that, and stars are going to be as follows. So I feel better about my stars because I'm trying really hard to not be so kind, because it devalues, I think, the really good books by associating them with the mediocre books. And so several 3 stars, several 3.5 stars. Those are like a third of what I read, and then like a little over a third. It's going to be 4 stars, and then just shy of a quarter would be 4.5 to 5 stars. Those are what I would consider favorites. 5s are hard, but I feel like 4.5s have capabilities of being favorites, even if they're not quite up there. And then the third quarter is about the same. I think we're nearly at half for 3 and 3.5 stars. That's good. That's a good quarter of me being brutally honest with my books. And then my 4 stars aren't quite as widespread, but then again, I guess that's where my 3 stars picked up the weight. And my 4.5 to 5 stars are a bit longer, meaning I had books I seem to enjoy more. Now, looking at diversity of the books beyond just the genres, let's start by looking at gender. Oh wow, this is disappointing. In the second quarter, I read 50% female, cis female, and about a third cis male, and then an eighth or just shy of a fourth of non-binary trans authors. And then we go to third quarter, and it's about 50-50 of cis male, cis female, which means I really failed when it came to non-binary folk and trans folk, and I am disappointed in myself because I guess I wasn't really thinking about it. Damn, I'm gonna have to make a point. Now I think about it, my TBRs, I'm not even sure I have a non-binary trans folk on my TBRs for November and December. This is bad. What is wrong with me? Shit. Okay, I'm gonna have to think about that. Damn, this is helping. See, I thought I was prepared for this, but it's a good thing that I'm doing this because it's getting me rethinking. Then we have queer rep in general. Oh, Jesus Christ, that's terrible. My second quarter is a third, which I guess isn't too bad, although I'm aiming for at least 50%. My third quarter, 2 books. What the hell is wrong with me? What was up with this third quarter? I thought I was getting back into the swing of things. I guess not. Jesus, I don't know what's up with that. Damn it, Janet. Okay, anyways, moving on now to ethnicity of the authors that I'm reading. I guess it's about consistent. So the second quarter is better, right? So we're looking at about half of what I read was people of color, with a wide range of representation. And then we get the third quarter again, and that representation gets cut down to a third with less variety. A lot of black authors. Next couple months, I have to think about who I'm reading. A lot of white people. This is stressing me out again. Yes, I mean, I have goals, but I'm also, one of my goals for next year is to have less goals. But still, as far as representation goes, that's important, so I have to make a point to think about what I'm reading. Anyways, and continuing on. Now, one good thing is that I made a point this year not to buy any new books. Sorry, no new books to add to my TBR, which is now we're going to talk about my TBR size, my TBR selection, and things like that. The ages of the books I'm reading. I guess just to go ahead and show you, this is my second quarter. The mix of where my books came from, either from my TBR, books that I bought in 2020 or earlier. It's been on my TBR since then, or arcs that I have that I've been needing to read. And I'm trying to make a point to read like at least an arc a month, sometimes more, to get up on that super NetGalley score, because eventually I'd like to make it a more mainstream thing. I think part of it was just I was requesting too much. Then the third quarter, a little bit different. We have more arcs. For my TBR is 2/3, which is good. The goal is to get my TBR down, and then rereads, a couple of rereads, which is I always like to make room for a couple of rereads. Okay, now moving on to just the age of the books that I read. Let's start with this one graph where I show you books that I read, the number of books that are of a certain age, meaning they've been on my TBR for 1 year, 2 years, so on and so forth. And then there's the number of books that I read for that age. And you can see most of the books that I read were 1 year or younger, clustered around that brand new books, with a couple very old books that I read that were between 4.5 and 6.5 years old, which is good. And always good to be tackling those oldest books on my TBR. And you can see I'm also hauling some books, which I may show you depending on how long this video is. Of those, a lot of them are newer books that I bought when I was in that phase last year buying a shit ton of books I shouldn't have been buying, and one older book, I guess, that I managed to get rid of. Now, comparing that to the total number of books that I own, I'm finally decided to show you the raw numbers, although this is a logarithmic scale, so you have to be able to read that. Basically, you can see how the books that I read compare to the books that I own. So while there are a lot of books that I read that are newer, a lot of the books that I own are newer as well. If you're curious what the total number on my TBR, beginning of this year was over 500. It's now down to 472. That was a number I wasn't comfortable sharing because I was so embarrassed at my gluttony and my overindulgence and my consumerism. But it's something I'm trying to tackle. And because of the fact that I've managed to avoid buying new books added to my TBR, I feel better about sharing this struggle, because it is honestly a struggle. But I do like my new system. Like I said, there are maybe 1 or 2 books that I bought this year to add to my TBR that I didn't read first. I do have a rule where I let myself read a book before I buy it, like just listen to it or something, and then I'll be able to buy it, which technically is cheating the system, but the number of times in which I read a book that is not on my TBR and then buy it is much, much smaller than the number of times where I buy a book with the intention of reading it once I add it to my TBR. The deficit is way smaller, which has been very helpful, and I'm less inclined to read something that's not on my TBR. The system is working really well. I'm very proud of myself, and I'm looking frankly at the books that I have and slowly unhauling them as well as I face the fact that this is not something I'm really passionate about. So comparing this on a normalized scale, for those of you who don't know what that is, it just basically means if you think of each bar graph as a fraction of the whole set of read books and whole set of owned books. The goal here to show you how they compare relatively, meaning like sure I'm reading a lot of newer books, but you can see how many books that I own of that age and whether or not that meets up. If I was reading completely spread out unanimously, you'd expect the red bars and the blue bars to all be matching, and they largely are, but they're not quite. It should be noted that the 2 bars that are the higher ages, those are like 1 books, and those are very, so that it normalizes a little bit higher, but it's basically about on par what I should be reading, one of those every quarter. Then the newer books, I could be standing to read a little bit older books that are on my TBR instead of getting the newer books that are most exciting. Books that I probably bought at the end of 2020 because I knew I wasn't going to buy any new ones in 2021. I was cheating my system. But I either need to start reading those older books or unhaul them, which I'm working on it. That's where I'm working on it. Now let's get on to favorite books of the 2 quarters. As with the last quarter that I did this for, I tried to choose books that were favorites of different genres. And I could have been more particular, but I decided not to be. And oddly enough, these are all classics. Who would have thought that my favorites of this semester, this quarter, would be all classics? Let's start with literary fiction, which technically this is marked as classic on my list, to be fair, but I'm going to talk about it as if it's a literary fiction. And that's going to be James Baldwin's Giovanni's Room, which had a profound impact. I felt like it really worked really well. I've talked about it, I want to say, my mid-year freakout tag, and it's still going to be a favorite of the year. It's just that story is like so dark and like so profound, and I could really connect it to the characters, at least in their internalized homophobia, as far as that goes, not in the sexism, but I could understand it. It's like a total favorite. Next, we'll talk about horror, and I didn't feel very strongly about horror, and my biggest issue with honestly naming this book is that this book felt not entirely horror, even though it's definitely gothic, so I guess we'll put that in the same category. We've always lived in the castle. It's just one page with the title up here. I'm trying really hard to find it. I'm a bad booktuber. You know what? That's not the point. You get the point, right? Shirley Jackson. We've always lived in the castle. It was not Haunting of Hill House, but it was still dark and psychological, and I feel like it really embodied her personal memoirs and those short stories that she told from like a family perspective. Like I really felt that very strongly reflected in this book. And then now let's go to nonfiction, which I want to give an honorary mention to Maya Angelou's A Song Flung Up to Heaven, her 6th memoir, I think it is, which I feel like is a reboot of sorts, where she recaps more of her life, but also narrates it, and it had a really strong impact. But for this one, I had to go with the 2nd memoir or autobiography of Frederick Douglass. I liked, so far as there is something to like, his first memoir. I didn't feel a strong connection to it. Like the writing itself just didn't feel like, it felt like someone who was trying to give a account of their life and leave it at that. The second one felt like he was trying not just to account his life and his life after slavery, but to really embody the soul and the feeling of America and to be a Black American, and to really convey to the reader what it was like, not just what he did, but what it felt like to be in his position. And it's just that emotional connection that I feel like was much stronger in the second one that really made this one very profound. And then lastly, my favorite sci-fi of the last 2 quarters. Believe it or not, another classic, and the runner-up to this would have been Foundation, another classic, so Jesus Christ, but Ray Bradbury's The Martian Chronicles. This one was a shocker. First off, narrated by one of my favorite narrators, Scott Brick. It is a series of short stories that flow consecutively, basically like a overarching story, but each story is basically disconnected from the last, different periods in time, where you slowly see mostly America, but also just the world in general, colonize Mars, and while they do so, they interact with live Martians. The science here is way out of date. I mean, I'm not sure it was ever in date, but it's bad. We know a lot more about Mars. But it's not about that. It's about the ideas that he's exploring while doing this. And oh God, I can reread this. It's so good. I remember vividly sitting on the swing set in the summer or in the spring, whatever it was, and just listening, just swinging back and forth, listening, so engulfed, encapsulated by this story. Oh my God, so good. Oh, just talking about it and reliving it in my mind. I love it. This says it's 30 minutes long. Maybe I shouldn't do the end of the year book tag here. Maybe what I'll do is I'm going to film the end of the year book tag. If it ends up being super short, I'll keep it on this video. If it's not, this is the end. I'm going to give you a closer and I'm just going to end it. I guess you'll know because it'll tell you the timestamp, but let's continue on, maybe. So the end of the year book tag. First question, are there any books you started that you need to finish? And short answer, no. I've finished or DNF'd everything that I started, but there is a book that I started last year that I am hoping to finish this month, and that is Peter Straub's A Ghost Story. Talk about it in my TBR. I started this, I had like 3 hours left, maybe a third left. I wasn't feeling it, but not enough to like completely disown it. So it's a book that I'm hoping to finish this year, before the year is out, before the month is out, to be honest. And the rest, yeah, there's none that I've actually put down the intent to return to. So next is, do you have an autumnal book to transition into the autumn season? I don't know. I can't read the question. Point is no, I don't have any one autumnal book. I have themed TBRs, so I have October Halloween themed TBRs, which honestly, if I'm being honest, I slowly started to work into a Halloween theme in August, and I worked my way up. In fact, I think it was in 2019 that I read exclusively horror in thriller or whatever, in August through October. That actually got kind of tiring. I ended up not reading a lot of horror for the first part of 2020. So yes, that's my transition. But also, I give it nonfiction November is a big indicator for me, something I look forward to, that in general, that all feels very fall-y. So I guess that would count, right? Is there a new release you're still waiting for. I'm going to give you a book that's already come out, Across the Saltwide Seas by A. Deborah Baker, aka Sean McGuire, for the Middle Game series. And I have read this now. I liked it. Not as much as the first one. It was too short in my opinion. But that's not the point here. That was a new release that was one of the only new releases I had planned on reading. There was another one that I got exposed to on a podcast that I want to read. It's called Being You by Nell Seth. And this is a book about consciousness. And I may or may not get to this year. I mean, I broke my rule and I requested on NetGalley. And I did get it. So I'm probably going to end up listening to it. If not in November, probably in October. November is going to be a packed month. And I already have so many science books I want to read. But anyways, continuing. What are 3 books you want to read before the end of the year? And for this, I decided to choose books from my upcoming TBRs. So we have nonfiction November and we have December. And I'm not sure if this was going to be which of those, but this is Galileo's Daughter, Historical Memoir of Science, Faith, and Love by David Sobel. She's an author who does science history, and I'm excited to get to this. I have wanted to for the longest time. So this is going to be a high priority before the year is out. December in general is a TBR of books that were either not on my TBR, wanted to be very close to being on there, or books that I was on my TBR I didn't get to. This is another case of that, The Devours by Ended Us, and this is a horror book about a monster of some sort, and when I read the synopsis it was really exciting, but I didn't get to it. And I could get to it in October possibly, but chances are I'm just going to push it off to December. It's another one that I would say is like up there is one I really want to get to before the year's out. And then Behave by Robert Sapolsky. This is about the biology of humans at the best and worst. So basically, what is it about our biology that drives us to make decisions, good and bad? What defines that? And that was something I was really interested in. It's really long, and I'm reading so many science books in November. But this is one that I'm fairly certain I'm going to try and get to very early on, because I'm just really invested in getting into it. The problem is I recognize that, first off, not all science books are the most engaging and the most easy to read, and because of that there's a plateau point. There's only so much I can take in a month, and I don't want to hurt myself, like make myself get into a slog, into a reading slump. But even if I don't get to November, maybe I'll push it off to December. I don't know. My December TBR has room to grow, put it that way. Those are those 3 books. Is there a book you think could still shock you and become your new favorite book? Damn it. I didn't think about this before. There's Maya Angelou's memoir, 7th memoir, which I want to get to in November. There is a number of Carl Sagan books, Dragons of Eden, which is a classic, but also his memoir, which I want to get to. It's not on audio, but that could end up being very impactful. I don't know. I've never heard much about it, but on a personal level, I'm so invested in Carl Sagan that hearing about his life could end up being a real favorite. I'm going to leave it at that, actually. I'll take it back. There's also a book called The Matriarch, which is by Susan Page. It's a book about Barbara Bush, the First Lady, and while I'm not particularly invested in her, I am invested in Susan Page, and I think she's a really great writer. She has the potential, if I manage to get to it, to really, really hit home. Have you already started making plans for 2021? And yes, I have. Generally speaking, like there were themed TBRs on my shelves that I created in like June or March of 2020 that I keep postponing because it's hard to get themed TBRs, especially the big ones that take up a lot of time. But like I have in my mind, I'm going to dedicate an entire month to at least one of these TBRs. And I'm excited to do it. I want to make it happen. I bought those books and I do want this goddamn themed TBR, even though it's gonna take a lot. But we're finally in a new year. We have room for me to invest heavily into one thing before I start getting my mindset on other goals, on other ideas. Which another thing that I want to do for 2021. 2021, what's wrong with me? 2022. Sorry, obviously 2022. Less goals. I have the intention to do like a goal video, but instead of doing 21 or 22 goals, I'll be doing 10 goals. And I might do a TBR for next year. It'll be at most 10 books, maybe 5 new books and 5 old books. But I don't like restricting myself to so many books. I need the room to grow. Because when I make that commitment, it's really important to me to meet my goals, to try and meet them. And that's part of what feeds into my slump that's happened this year. And that's the end of the year book tag. It is the end of the year, like it really is. I wasn't even sure if I wanted to do this because it's October. It should be Halloween themed, but it can't keep waiting because the end of the year is here. Jesus Christ, this year has flown by way quicker than 2020, but honestly, I'm grateful for it. 2020 sucked. It was way too slow, even though I did get a lot of reading done. But, this has been a good year so far. I mean, not great as far as a lot of things go, but I think better than last year. My grandparent didn't die this year, so that's a plus. Get it dark, because as dark as possible as we say goodbye. Thank you so much if you stuck to the end. I think I am going to end up mushing these two together. Might be kind of long. I'm sorry for that. I'll make sure I'll put timestamps in at least, so it's easier on you. if you did make it to the end, I am so very grateful. Why don't you give me an emoji in the comments to show you made it this far? Let's say some kind of goal or something, or celebration to say we've made it. We've almost made it, at least. We're there. As always, hope you have a great day and hope you stay safe, and I will see you next time, okay? Bye.